Dr. Sirajuddin, what do you suggest to people and even patients, for example, um, who may be feeling the anxiety and the stress, perhaps, of being isolated from their communities and their loved ones? What do you say to people to maintain optimism? And after that, I'd like Dr. Riaz to kind of weigh in on the Islamic perspective on that. So, Dr. Sirajuddin, if you could take that question first.
Well, that's a loaded question, is because if you're asking a patient, especially who is alone at home, and how to put up with just not, really spending their time, and how psychologically they're going to get affected, and how are you going to soothe them, that's going to be a very, very difficult thing for any one of us to tell any patient, especially who's alone at home. And I feel this is a time where I would probably want to piggyback on the prior question with regard to
Sure.
how to maintain community. And I feel we have so much technology. At the same time, also, a community, not necessarily just our Islamic community, but overall the community we live in. Because one of the biggest things which you brought up, where people are stuck at home, are these are the people who are probably elderly, who don't have any other help, and who normally go out and do their stuff. And these are the same people who are not going to call for help because they have a certain ego, they have a certain self-esteem. So especially when people put on social media, hey, we are here to help you and things like that, it's just not going to fly, you know. So it's really going to take people who you know personally, like your neighbors. Like in Islam, it talks highly about helping your neighbors. If you know people who are going to be at home alone, and you actually make that extra call and ask them. So I've actually been extreme. You'll be shocked because people who you don't think who might require help, you know, there are a lot of people who are well-to-do, but they are older and they're alone at home. And just calling them and say, hey, I'm going to get groceries. Do you want any groceries? You'll be shocked how many people say, yes, I want these things. And usually they're hesitant the first week. The first week they say, can you just get me this and this? The second week, their shopping list goes up by two or threefold. The third week it goes up, fivefold, which is good, because otherwise, just think about the psychological stress or mental stress, staying at home, worried about contracting the illness and not having any food and scared about going out to go. So whether you're a male, you're a female, head of the household or not, I feel this is a time where if you feel you can go out and get groceries for your own household, please check on somebody else who you know, who's older and who you think should not be leaving home. So I think that as a community is going to solve the problem of psychological issues people are going to encounter. Now, coming back to your question about what would you tell patients about psychological stuff, to be more pragmatic and realistic, I think not just my patients, I'd like to tell the whole world this.
Sure.
Irrespective of what your profession is and everything like that, there's going to be a huge, let me reiterate, a huge psychological impact on every one of us, including the three of us. We just don't realize it yet.
Sure.
Because even after we are over with this, how are we really going to interact outside is a big enigma. How are you going to really, are you going to shake hands? And how open-heartedly are you really going to shake hands? Are you actually going to give a hug to somebody else you know? Are you going to have something at the back of your mind? Is this other person carrying the, coronavirus? I think as opposed to people in the military or people who have been exposed to any kind of trauma, this is where I think the whole world population is going to experience post-traumatic PTSD,
Stress.
and
Mm.
just like Dr. Riaz mentioned, we are not immune as physicians. We are not immune as Muslims. We are not immune as anything. I think we are all going to be in it together, and it's going to be something we're going to find out. So coming back to the religious aspect of it, if the best way you can actually uh, tell anybody who is experiencing any kind of psychological stress is the only person, the only entity which can ever help under these kind of things is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upstairs, I think the peace, the sakina you get at your heart is absolutely the best you can get. And that goes with increasing your iman and what you are doing to ask for that peace in your heart. And I don't think any medical profession or any medical professional can be able to do that. So that's the best way I can answer that question.
Well, a couple things. I think I know who I'm going to call when my Instacart subscription runs out. So yeah, thank you for being so kind to your neighbors and your community. That's great. And I think you do make a point that you know, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, or God, is all knowing, and He's, if you put your trust in Him and faith in Him, then that's utmost importance. I think we should also, you know, from a medical perspective, say that if you are having depression or stress disorders, that there are professionals that can help you even in the midst of this pandemic. So, you know, to seek, I think people should seek help if they are in need of help.
Absolutely.
In addition to putting their trust in God.
100%. I think there are several psychiatrists who are available on telehealth medicine, and I feel I tell all my patients, not just because I'm a cardiologist.
Sure.
I tell my patients, I reiterate why, as a cardiologist, I still have my clinic open for emergencies, is because by you talking to somebody, irrespective of your field of medicine you are in, by you talking to somebody over telehealth, you can calm them down. So you don't have to be a psychiatrist. Just be available for your patients. And if the patient wants to talk to you, get on the phone. If it means they're going to talk to you about COVID-19, talk to them about it. If it means they talk, just lay a lending ear. So every one of us, and at the same time, it's going to be interesting how many psychiatrists are going to be available, because I think I can tell you almost majority are undergoing some element of anxiety and depression. And it's all going to,
Right.
break loose once, but hopefully we would have resources for people to call. But I strongly encourage every physician, irrespective of specialty, to keep the phone lines open and answer every single patient's call.
And before I go to Dr. Riaz about the Islamic perspective on this whole question here, I think it's important to say that there is obviously the Muslim community, but we are also a part of the fabric of, you know, the American community that we live in. And as American Muslims, we need to make sure that, like you mentioned, we should be checking in on our neighbors, irrespective of creed, race, religion. This is a time for us to really come together as a community, you know, not just a Muslim community. I think it's important as Muslims that we stay together and do the best we can for each other, but also for our non-Muslim community. So, Dr. Riaz, what are your thoughts to add to this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think in terms of practical things, Dr. Sirajuddin did a marvelous job sort of saying what we can do. I think, you know, I'll maybe say internally what we can do is to kind of look back historically, what did Muslims do when plagues and pestilences happened? And it kind of goes back to historically what we as Muslims did is view these opportunities as means and occasions to make tawbah, to make repentance, to make istighfar, to seek forgiveness, and to draw closer to Allah. And how Muslims viewed this is that they view this not necessarily that this is a punishment to other people, but really a punishment for things that we ourselves have been lackadaisical or just ineffective in doing in terms of our relationship with Allah, and also our relationship that we have in fulfilling obligations to other people. So I think one of the biggest things we can all do is really on a daily basis, set aside some individual time, when nobody's looking, and to beg Allah to forgive me, not my spouse, my children. Yes, we should obviously make dua for everybody as well too, but I think there's a component of individual tawbah that we need to be making, as well as a group and family tawbah that we need to be making, because that's what the Muslims did. They understood that historically that things happened because perhaps there was a deficiency in the spiritual and moral welfare. Um, when some of the plagues of Damascus would happen, when one time there was a big plague in Damascus that happened, and Abdullah ibn al-Jarrah, the famous companion, was a governor at that time. And I'm not advocating this. So I'm going to say this with a caveat. I'm not saying we should go out and do this, but after the plague subsided, he actually had all the people who drank alcohol, he had them lashed. And the idea was that to sort of make it known that sometimes when sins occur, that they don't just affect the sinner, but they can affect other people as well. So again, I'm not saying that we go out and start lashing people left and right, but the bigger point I'm trying to make is that we as Muslims had this understanding that sins don't necessarily just affect us in the afterlife. They don't just affect us individually, but they can have a societal component to it. So one of the biggest things people ask are now, what can I do to help? And perhaps on an ethical and spiritual level, one of the biggest things we can do to help is to try to cut out as many sins that we are doing out of our lives. That's one of the greatest community services that we can do. And we have to really believe that that has an effect. Now, that doesn't mean we just do that and don't look after our neighbor. No, this goes hand in hand. So you do everything that Dr. Sirajuddin said, be of service, help the neighbor, be available, phone call, all that type of stuff, but hand in hand. And that's what makes the Muslim model different, because otherwise, if all we're doing is only just helping people and having food banks and all of that, we're not any different than any other faith group. And it's wonderful that other faith groups are doing that. But how do we distinguish ourselves is that we have to keep the ethical and spiritual on our akhlaqi, islahiness, sort of the rectification of ourselves on that level. That has to be kept on hand in hand with those activities as well. And then the second thing I would say is that Muslims had kind of a very practical, sometimes even a sense of humor about things. And why I say by that is there's one example that comes out that there was, when the Abbasids conquered Damascus, there was a great plague which had happened right before that time. And when the Abbasids took over that city, the governor stood before the townspeople and said that we have delivered you from your oppressors, and we've also delivered you from the plague. And one of the townspeople got up and said that Allah is not so unjust that he would give you and give us the plague. In other words, he was saying that you're going to be unjust to us. We know that. So that's why Allah at least took the plague away from us. So what I mean by that is that people maintained a sense of this is life. It's not to be panicked about. Qiyamah hasn't happened. And they maintained a sense of sobriety, a sense of almost a little bit of humor with it to try to pick each other up. And that I think is very important, that we try to pick each other up, be friendly with people, Muslim, non-Muslim, especially our families, our spouses. We're spending a lot of time with them. So I'd encourage, especially the men, be nice and kind to your wives, be your children. You're frustrated with things, go run around the block and work your stress and anger out. Don't yell at people. Don't get angry because the rice was undercooked and that type of thing. Like this is your moment of being sort of that bedrock. And so those are things that we can do, is especially being sources of happiness and sobriety to other people. So those are the two things I would add from what Dr. Sirajuddin had mentioned.
Okay. Question for me: What do I do about Tarawih? This idea of going to the masjid for nightly prayer. Now, this is like a novel concept to me. To maybe not to others, but to me, it's a tradition to go to the masjid to pray Tarawih. what are we going to do? What am I going to do?
Yeah. Well, we know that, like I said, these things have happened before historically,
Sure.
and Tarawih, thankfully, is not fard. It's a sunnah. It's a strong sunnah, and it's not a sunnah that I take lightly, and it's not a sunnah that should ever be abandoned if we can. But at the same time, this may give us an opportunity for those of us at home to be the imam of Taraweeh at home for our family and our kids. We don't have to finish the entire Quran in Taraweeh. Even just three ayahs in each rak'ah is sufficient. So we should definitely still pray Taraweeh at home with our families, whether it's 8 or 20. I'm not going to open up that Pandora's box
Please
of
don't.
argument. But I think we all can still pray at home with our families. In some ways, this may put within, especially our young children, a love for Taraweeh, because now they're seeing everybody at home doing it. So I think we should try to look at the glass half full. In terms of the logistics, people have asked, well, can we have sort of a Zoom Taraweeh? And unfortunately, the answer to that is that prayer has to be done with a physical gathering. In other words, I can't be leading in my house and have everybody zoomed in, and as the Imam of Taraweeh, people can follow behind me. And so, Sharia-wise, that is not permissible, especially for a Sunnah prayer. So, I think what instead we can do, and many masajid and organizations looking to do this, is to try to increase programming, such as halaqat, bayans, these types of things, especially during Ramadan, so people still feel a sense of connection to the masjid with some sort of programming. But I would actually maybe argue that, again, glass half full, is that maybe this is an opportunity this year that we all have more individual time to, at least get one tilawah of the Quran done. There's should be no excuse for us not to be able to do that, because we're all at home. Maybe spend some time, reading some tafsir, and maybe going into a little bit more detail of the Quran that we've always wanted to do, but because we're working, trying to go to Taraweeh and this, that, we may not have an opportunity to do that. So I still think we can make a good relationship with the Quran, and that's why I said this can either be a very blessing for us, or it can be very difficult for us. So I think if we plan ahead, we have about little under 3 weeks now, where if we can plan ahead and say, what am I going to do this month, this upcoming Ramadan, to try to salvage and do whatever I can so that I can still benefit. Obviously, inshallah, we'll all fast. That's not a problem. But in terms of like what you said, what is going to be like my Taraweeh replacement? And I think for many of us, it can be something as simple as, I'm going to read 1, 2, 3 tilawas of the Quran. I'm going to study some tafsir. I'm going to try to listen to more lectures and things like that online. So there are ways I think we can still, inshallah, get some benefit. Unfortunately, as much as I wish we could say that a Zoom type of Taraweeh would be possible, legally, from a juristic perspective, it would not be a permissible prayer.